My 2080 Ti
sucks.
Well, not the actual 2080 Ti itself, more so the cooler that I put on top of it. Now, before I show you what my graphics card looks like, let me kind of tell you about the two different types of coolers that you can find on graphics cards these days. So we all know what a graphics card looks like. Or do we? There's actually two different types of coolers that graphics cards can be shipped with these days. One is more popular than the other. Now, the first cooler type is the one that we see on a day-to-day basis. It's a lot more popular than the other type, and it's called an open air design. Now, kind of as the name states, open air design, there are normally 2 or 3 fans on the front bringing in the cool, fresh air. Right underneath the fans will be the copper heatsink, which is making very, very, very close contact with the GPU die on the PCB board. And the heat is kind of dissipated all around the card, hence the name open air. Now, the second type of cooler or heatsink isn't really in circulation as much as the open air coolers. The design is a lot more simple, a lot more streamlined compared to the open airs. A fan normally on the front of the card or the rear, depending how you look at it, brings in that fresh air, and the fresh air is then tunneled through a plastic shroud that is then put on top of the card, and the heat is then expelled towards the rear of the card where you normally plug in your HDMI, your DVI cables. Now, while that cool air is traveling through that plastic shroud and that tunnel, it actually passes through a vapor chamber. Now, to keep it short and simple, a vapor chamber is kind of a small chamber that holds a liquid, but when this liquid is heated up, it turns into a vapor, which we also known as heat. So then that heat is then dissipated through the actual fan or the air movement itself through the card. So lesson over, back to the present day. When I purchased my 2080 Ti, it actually came with a PNY blower heatsink on top of it. And now, while it might look great and streamlined, this for gaming and the video encoding that I'm doing and video processing through Adobe, it's not really the best thing. The card heats up to like 80, 85, sometimes even pushing 90 degrees. And that's hot, to be honest with you. And it's not so dangerous. I mean, it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. It's more just the longevity of your products. If you want to see them for a long time and you really want to make use of them, you kind of got to start caring for their well-being and make sure they're not on that brink or that limit all the time. So within the first week of owning the card, straight away onto Amazon, I looked for any alternatives that I can find. Now, I've never dived into anything like this before, so it was a first time for me. I tried to look for solutions and I came across the Arctic Accelero Xtreme IV. Now, an absolute mouthful that is to say. I will say it's quite a sight to look at, that's for sure. I will be honest, from the product page, I did assume, how bad can it be? We've all said that, and yeah, when this thing arrived, I kind of underestimated how big and chunky it will be sitting on the actual PCB itself. Now, I will say though, it's not all bad news. The temps while playing games, while rendering stuff is amazing. I will say the card was nowhere near pushing 70 degrees. Streaming, playing games, it was crunching through everything, and to be honest with you, wasn't even busting a sweat. But this year, I'm kind of planning a few PC changes. I really want to change my case, and I really want to go down the Lian-Li route and vertical mount my GPU. So unfortunately, this card really isn't going to cut it, and its big chunky looks, it's not going to sit right in the case. Also, if you do want to see that build, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're going to have that coming up for you. So I took to eBay and luckily I came across this listing, and this guy was selling 3 2080 Ti MSI Ventus coolers. Now, I actually spoke to the guy. He was just changing his cards from air cooling to water cooling. He got some blocks from EK. So he was just sitting on 3 coolers with no use for them. So immediately I purchased that thing. Now it's time to tear apart the Arctic. So the GPU is pretty much held together with 4 simple thumb screws that slot through the PCB and hold onto the backplate cooler. Once these are off, the GPU bracket is unscrewed and the card pretty much just falls apart in your hand and the internals are revealed. So first things first, we need to get all the old memory pads off and wipe off all the old thermal paste that was sitting on the die itself. With everything cleaned, it's time to prime our new heatsink and our new mid plate. So the way that this heatsink works is there's the cooler and the fans on top. There's a mid plate that sits in between the cooler and the PCB. So that's where all of your thermal pads and anything else like that would live. So time for another quick lesson here. Thermal pads actually can be bought in various sizes. Now the pads that I've seen come from 0.5, 1mm, 1.5, all the way up to 2mm. Now, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, well, it can't be that much of a difference, right? Like, 0.5 to 1mm or 1.5. But when we're talking contact with the GPU die itself, we are really talking about millimeters here. Every centimeter on that die needs to be making good enough contact that the heat can be transferred into your heatsink and then dispersed and dissipated through your fans and the air that's being brought in. Now, you will see from the clips that I'm going to put up here that I learned this lesson the hard way, and you can see that if you put the wrong pads on, So the pads that I was using on my Arctic were 2mm thick. You can see quite an extensive bulge on the card and it just doesn't sit right, and there's not a good contact being made with the die itself. So an important lesson for anyone that's looking to repad their GPU, make sure you do your homework, dig through the forums, Reddit, wherever it may be, YouTube. Just make sure you know what pads to buy and where the pads sit, because each different component has a different height on the PCB, so different pads may need to be in different places. But anyway, now that the correct pads have arrived, it's time to tear it down all again, give it a good clean with the Arctic solution, and then reapply the good thermal pads, the correct size ones, on our mid plate and put it all back together again. As you can tell, I had so much fun doing this. So once our mid plate was primed with all of our pads, it was time to put the main ingredient that's going to give us that good contact with the GPU die and the copper heatsink itself. Thermal paste is kind of that bridge that sits in between your PCB and the copper heatsink. It just fills all of the microscopic gaps that you might not be able to see, just to make sure that heat is transferred effectively and efficiently. So for my GPU, we're going to be using one of the, I'd say, the industry leading and the industry best. First time buying it for me, but this is the Thermo Grizzly Cryonaut. So now that it's time to put the card all back together, we put it back together and then we do a nice visible check. Can we see that bump? Can we see through the card itself? And as you can see, I think we're good this time. No bump, we're looking good. After the visual check, it's time to slot it into the PC and run the Heaven benchmark. For you guys that don't know, a Heaven benchmark is basically just giving your GPU 100% of load for as long as you run it, basically. As soon as the application opens, the card will immediately start heating up as it's got calculations and graphics to render on your screen. But I can confirm we're good. I left it for about 45 minutes to an hour. And the temps were good. We were sitting about 70, 75 degrees. The hotspot was pushing about 80, 85 degrees. So yeah, good. Now, don't judge the little temporary solution of the Arctic bottle. The Arctic bottle is only there just because I had a lot of GPU sag. There's a lot of weight towards the rear end of the card. And obviously, as you can tell by that Arctic, it was really weighing down the card, and through the heat and everything that's kind of been building up in the case, the PCB has obviously started flexing and kind of slowly changing its shape. So unfortunately, you can't really undo PCB flexing just because, you know, it's natural, it's going to occur. So the bottle is kind of there just to push it back up. Not going to fix the solution, but it's a temporary solution until we switch over to the Lian-Li, and it's going to be vertically mounted anyway. So after that, I won't really have to worry about it. But that brings me to the end of the video. Now, if you watch this and you gained a little bit of confidence or something like that, good. I hope this, you know, kind of holds your hand through the process of tearing down your graphics cards. Or even if you were just curious just to see how these things are put together, it's a nice insight and hopefully this helped you. If you did enjoy the video, I would appreciate it if you drop a like on the video because it does help me a lot. Hit the sub button to make sure you don't miss any future uploads on the channel that I do. Links to all of my social medias, including my Twitch stream, are going to be down below in the description. I would appreciate if you check those out, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Take care. Peace.